Before we get into today's podcast, I wanted to share that QCon London returns April 7 to 9, 2025. Learn what's next from world-class leaders pushing the boundaries. You'll learn actionable insights from senior software developers working on real-world projects across multiple domains. Learn more at qconlondon.com. Good day, folks. This is Shane Hastie for the InfoQ Engineering Culture Podcast. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with Sophie Weston. Sophie, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
My normal starting point with these conversations is, who's Sophie?
Sophie is someone who's been working in tech for about 30 years. It's terrifying to say it out loud these days. I spent many years working as a software developer, mostly in Java, mostly on Unix, but doing all sorts of other things as well, like Python and TCL and lots of scripting stuff. But I had the privilege of kind of working in a DevOps way, even before the word had kind of been invented. So that was my natural kind of shift then, in more and more sideways into DevOps and how we actually do work and how teams are working and how we make it better. And here I am today, still doing it, working as a principal engineer, but very focused on the people side of that rather than actual, not hands-on with tech anymore.
So at QCon London last year, you hosted a track, How Do Teams Really Work? So can I ask you to answer that question? How do teams really work in software engineering today?
I mean, I don't think there's any one way, but I think that some ideas have taken hold around the idea that teams need to be autonomous and make their own decisions, or at least some degree. And we talk about having long-lived product teams these days. But I think some teams are doing it more it's more about the words than actually doing it. I think sadly too many people are still kind of just doing projects and it's still feature factory and there's still too much of that going on. So it varies, I guess. There's no one answer. But I think we all think we're doing agile. Again, I'm not sure how true that is. So there's some ideas are prevalent, but I think it varies from team to team. I worry that teams aren't getting enough time to do the things that make a good software team. I think there's too much focus on getting stuff out the door because obviously that's what we need. We need to deliver value to our customers. That's why we're there. But I think some of the ideas around how we do that well are still counterintuitive to people who aren't involved in software and other parts of the business. And I think we struggle to kind of make a good case sometimes for how we do software well. I think it's more of an art than a science. And it's not a feature factory. You can't just churn it out because it's knowledge work.
One of the points I'd like to dig into there and pick some of these apart. So, agile versus tragile.
I haven't heard that. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
I have to give credit to Phil Abernathy for that one. And tragile was one that I picked up from him. And certainly in my experience, looking back over 20 plus years of the Agile Manifesto, I have seen a small group of organizations who really got it and lots of the Agile veneer and no real culture shift.
Yeah. What I see is we talk about Agile only in development teams. So I wish I could show you, there's a cartoon that came from John Smart's book about Sooner, Safer, Happier, where you kind of see a dev team in the middle of the whole process and they're going, yay, we're so agile. But there's all this stuff either side of them that isn't, so it's taking months and months and months to get this idea to the point where it's in a dev team. And then there's all the stuff afterwards that we don't think about, getting it into production, but then operating it and supporting it and then decommissioning it. And then there's this tiny little slice in the middle and we're going, yay, we're so agile. Woo, 2-week sprints. And it's kind of, when you take that step back and look at it in a more systemic way, you just go, well, yeah, okay, great. Whoa, we're agile. And I think, like I said, because I'd been working in that DevOps way even before Patrick Dubois called it DevOps, just because I was working in a team where we were dev and ops together working for a single customer. So it just seemed natural that you would talk to the ops engineers about how you were going to develop your software so they could support it well. We weren't even doing you build it, you run it, but we were kind of integrated. we just don't think about that. We just think about getting stuff out the door as fast as we can. And it's not just about dev. We need to look at the wider picture. And even if it is just about getting stuff out the door, even when you kind of do want to focus in on the software development part, like I said, it's knowledge work. So it's not just like churn it out, because the code is not the hard bit in some ways. And we know that if you can solve a problem with less code, that's good, because the more lines of code you have, the more complicated it is to support, the more hard it is. So we want to be writing less code and solving problems. This is why I think AI is going to be interesting, because the way we're looking at AI in software development, it all seems to be about Copilot and more code and yeah, great, just bung it in and get it out the door. And I don't think that's where the problem is or where the benefits are.
So what are some of those good team practices that we are neglecting in our focus on get the code out and more code and more code?
I don't think we're making time or space for the other things that we need to do. Things like documentation. I know it's dull and everybody goes, ooh, it's almost like a joke that engineers don't like to write it. But we need it. It's important, especially when we are kind of working remotely or working across distributed teams and across time zones. You need that, because otherwise you're just creating bottlenecks in the system. You need to be able to kind of self-service that information. And, particular things like onboarding. When you get a new engineer into your team, you want them to be able to be productive as quickly as possible and not have them, wasting time and being miserable. Because it's horrible when you kind of sat there and you think, you don't want to go and have to ask everybody. So it's both. It's about making it a good experience for them and also about being good for the business, because you want them to be useful. So that's one particular example. Runbooks is another one. Again, it's like that classic thing of incidents at 3 a.m. because they always happen at 3 a.m. That's always the time we have to quote. You want people to have access to the information they need, and it's no good it being in people's heads. So you have to write it down. And it's just like, it's a documentation. Like, that's very boring, but we need it, and we don't make time or space for it. We always kind of say, oh yeah, we'll come back to that. But we don't, because then we have the next feature to get out the door. Just things like retros, team retros, time together to reflect, to learn, to take that step back and say, how can we do this better? And also personal time to just not be flat out, just to be curious and to learn and just to take a look at what you've got, what your system is, and just kind of go, why does that look like that? I wonder if I could. And you don't give people that space. They don't have that continuous improvement time. And then also more things like more organizational things like tech talks, like weekly tech talks or guilds or things. Again, it's time away from writing code, but you give people space to learn. They meet people outside of their team. So you create new connections, you create new ideas, and people, next time they have a problem, they might go, oh yeah, I was talking to somebody at that guild or that. They might know about that. And you create different bonds. But this is all stuff that doesn't have immediate return on investment. It's slower and it's less visible, but it's massively important that you make space and time for these things to happen.
We slow down to speed up.
Yeah, exactly. And it is less visible, especially things like tech talks. You kind of go, oh, give engineers, 45 minutes or an hour every week to go and just sit around. But they're not. They're learning things and they're creating connections. And some of the people who are doing the talking, that's another skill. That's another good skill that people get, and a chance to practice it and learn it in a safe environment. Public speaking, putting your talk together. It's all good stuff.
So how did we get into this feature factory rut?
I don't think we're very good at making a case for ourselves somehow. No, I mean that in the kind of the broadest sense, not just dev. It's not the same as, I'm not going to try and belittle the construction industry, but it's not the same as building a bridge, or it's not the same as doing that, because it is different every time. It is knowledge work. And I don't think we make a good case to other parts of the business that we need to work in this particular way, and that it's not just a case of everything's the same, just churn it out. Every problem is different. Every time you come to write it, I mean, obviously this we have patterns, we have architectural patterns, and we have software patterns, but you're applying them in a different way each time. And for the stuff that you're not applying in the same way each time, you should just be making that as painless as possible. And this is the kind of things like platform engineering, which is where DevOps is evolving into platform engineering, and the whole idea of team topologies, where you have layers of platforms so that the people that are kind of higher in the stack are solving business problems. They don't have to think about how to provision a database or Kubernetes. They can just self-serve that stuff and solve the business problem. But I don't know, it just feels like we're always trying to have to argue that we need to work in this particular way and that space and time for these things are as important.
How do we advocate?
I don't know. I don't know how we get people to understand the kind of the counterintuitive nature of some of this, the slowdown to speed up. Because we seem to have an obsession as well now with quantitative data. And it's like, unless you can show hard data and hard numbers for it, people kind of aren't interested. And it's like, it's somehow qualitative data and telling stories and having people's experience is seen as less worthy or having less kind of weight to it than hard numbers. So it's like the DORA metrics. When they first came out of State of DevOps report and Accelerate, it was like amazing. Like frequency of deployment, change failure rate, time to recover. I can't remember what the last one is. But they were kind of revolutionary. They were amazing. And now they've another thing that's kind of a bit like agile. It's like they've been taken and not abused, but a little bit. It's like now they're seen as the only things you have to care about. But there's an awful lot more to creating software and writing software, which is why I like where things like the space framework and the DevOps framework are advocating for using the qualitative as well as those hard quantitative metrics. Because you have amazing DORA metrics. You could be doing, 1,000 releases a day. But what value are you actually giving to your customers and what experience are your engineers having while producing those amazing DORA metrics? They could be burnt out. They could be totally miserable. They could be looking for new jobs every night on LinkedIn. It's that quality of experience is important as well as the hard quantitative data that you get from things like DORA metrics.
One of the most misquoted adages of management today is that which gets measured gets managed. Because if you actually look at the whole quote, the author whose name it wasn't Benning, but it was one of those experts, is actually saying that which gets measured gets managed, even if it shouldn't be.
Yes.
We also all too often miss the rest of it.
Yeah. All of this is about making it better for the people in tech. It's like that's kind of where when DevOps started to become more of a movement and people were talking about and the idea of like continuous integration and continuous deployment began to kind of become a thing. It made a lot of sense to me because not only is it good for the business, obviously you want to be able to release and get more value out more quickly and you don't have to do releases out of hours and the weekends and that kind of thing. But that is also really good for the people doing it because no one wants to be doing releases at the weekend and in the evenings. I've been there and done it and it's horrible. And big scary releases where you're releasing 6 months worth of stuff and you've got this massive plan written down on paper that you do this step, do this step, do this step. But you've got no rollback plan and you've got no way to test it and you just got to kind of keep going. That's no fun. That's no good for anybody. So the ideas of DevOps where we can automate and do tiny little releases as frequently as we like and get fast feedback, that's better for everybody. So it's kind of win-win. And that's why I like it. And I kind of see the same with the platform engineering stuff coming through where, because the whole idea of shift left was a good one, shift left along, get testing left, but earlier in the development process. But as things like Docker and containerization kind of started to come along and that started to shift that left us into dev world, it felt like more and more stuff was becoming the responsibility of devs. It's like when I was developing and I worked with ops engineers, I wrote applications and then, yes, I kind of handed it over. I didn't have to worry about provisioning the infrastructure for it to live on. I didn't have to understand about networking beyond the simplicity of, please, can you open this firewall port so the database can speak to my app kind of level of understanding it. But as more and more stuff started to shift left, it felt like more and more stuff was becoming the responsibility of dev. So cognitive load and it's just, doing everything. So platform engineering, can't remember who said it. It's something about don't shift left. It's abstract down, but it's that idea of push it down rather than left so that it becomes a platform, so that the software engineers, the devs solving the business problems can just self-serve. Again, that to me is about kind of making it better for people in a kind of slightly abstract way. It's like, it's miserable when you've got to try and think about everything and do everything and be responsible for everything, and it's overwhelming. So that to me is also about kind of making it better.
So what makes a good platform engineering team?
So I think it's all just software, but it's kind of what interests you. If you think vertical stack, some people like doing web UIs. They like that whole UX and making things look pretty. I hated it. I was the world's worst. Never get me to do web UX. Awful, because I just don't care enough. I appreciate it when someone else has done a good job. Likewise, I didn't want to be low level. My first kind of job when I graduated was doing very low level stuff, like working with an assembler, creating software for mobile radios. Likewise, I hated that. It was too low level and too kind of nickety. My perfect mid spot for me was like working with databases. It was back end stuff, talking to databases, doing the kind of middleware. And I think people just have a natural affinity to where they want to live in that stack of software. So I think a good platform engineer is just a software engineer who somehow is drawn to that level of abstraction or involvement in the tech stack. But I think the principles are the same. They're still just software teams. They still need to think about their customers and work in a good way and try and make things so that they're delivering value in that self-service idea of delivering what people need. I don't think it's a lot different other than that.
One of the challenges we often see is the great individual contributor, a great engineer who's then made a manager and not given the support or training they need. And suddenly you've got a really frustrated poor manager.
It's a tricky problem because they're different skill sets, aren't they? They really are different skill sets. But I think to be a good engineering manager, you have to have a techie mind. I don't know whether I'd need to say you absolutely have to have been hands-on a software engineer or, an engineer of some kind, because I do think they're very, very different. But you do need someone who's in the tech space enough that they understand the problems and they understand it's like they understand the people, because at the risk of offending my fellow software engineers, we are a quirky bunch quite often. We are renowned for not having very good social skills, and that kind of. I'm making stereotypes here, but I think as a good engineering manager, you need to understand and appreciate techies for who we are. But I don't know if you do actually need to have been a software engineer. But for those people who do start as engineers and want to make that transition to managers, yeah, they need more support. They absolutely need more training. Again, it's about having space and time, isn't it, to learn the skills that you need to learn to be a good manager. I think it's better now than it was earlier in my career. I think it's easier to stay as an individual contributor if you want to. There is less pressure, I think, to make that jump into management. I think that was stronger when I was younger. So I think that there's more of a dual track now. But I do think we need to support people who want to aim at that jump. And kind of also, Charity Majors talked about the engineering manager pendulum. She wrote some really interesting stuff, kind of saying that for some people, that's almost how their career is going to be. They start as an engineer and they go and be a manager for a bit. And then they want to go back and be an individual contributor because they want to get immersed in the tech again. And then they want to go and work with people. So we should also be supporting that, because I don't think it should be a once and only choice for the people who do want to do that. They've got things to offer and contribute on both sides. Why not let them do that?
And your role currently is principal engineer. What was the journey to get there?
A squiggly one. So I did spend like 20 odd years just doing straight software development. But as I started to get more interested in kind of the systems of work themselves, like I got very into Kanban and DevOps and actually how we do the work. I started to kind of move more into, I had a job title for a while as DevOps advocate. So I was trying to work with teams to bring some of those ideas. And specifically at that point, I was working with ops teams where I was working. They kind of had two streams to their business. One was software development, bespoke software development. The other was managed service. So that they had teams of just ops engineers supporting other people's platforms. And it was interesting working with them because they seemed very far behind software development in terms of ideas like agile and doing retros and thinking about how much work in progress and all that kind of stuff. So I was working with teams of ops engineers, kind of trying to get them thinking about that kind of stuff. Yeah, so kind of just kept going sideways a bit from actual hands-on tech, getting more into the people side and the culture side, which being a principal engineer is more about that. I guess in some ways it's a bit like an engineering manager role in that you need to have had that experience in some ways more so than a manager, but you're not actually writing tech anymore. You're working with people who are writing code.
What is a good engineering culture?
I think it goes back to what I was saying at the start. It's about understanding that it's not just about churning out code. It's about making it a good place to do that, but understanding that part of what makes good code isn't actually about writing code. Again, it's counterintuitive. It's somewhere that has space for learning and space for doing dull stuff like writing documentation. It's little things. Kent Beck gave an amazing talk about, he was talking about fix the little things, but he was talking about code. Like, fix that broken test and do that bit of refactoring and don't promise to come back and do it and then never do it. And I kind of think engineering culture is also, it's all little things. And DevOps was little things. They used to look at the kind of the unicorns who were doing amazing things. It's because they'd automated this little problem and fixed that little problem and automated this and, improved that test there. It's always little things that make up the big things. And you have to kind of pay attention to them. So making space to your documentation, making it matter, having things like definition of ready and definition of done, paying attention to how much work in progress you've got, giving people time to have retros, giving people space to go to conferences. Like I said, it feels counterintuitive, but then you will get better code and you'll get better value and you'll get people solving problems in better ways.
You touched on burnout. It's endemic. How do we, I don't know if we can prevent, but how do we mitigate? How do we reduce the levels of burnout in our industry?
Doing some of the stuff I've just talked about, making it less about just getting stuff out the door. There's always so much pressure. Making more time for people, I guess. Those engineering managers that we talked about, they need to have those skills as well about being able to recognize it, about having time to do proper one-to-ones, to get to know the people they're managing so that they can recognize the signs when it does start to happen and do something about it. Having it so that engineering managers aren't themselves burnt out because they're trying to manage too many people and they have their own kind of, not quite feature factory, but, whatever factory that you want to call that.
Sophie, a lot of great ideas, lots of food for thought here. If people want to continue the conversation, where do they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, and I am recently made the jump to Blue Sky. So you can find me there as well.
We'll make sure we include those links. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
You're welcome. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you for inviting me.